Oh, and I just added this in a little commercial break that there is recovery story solicitations that are outstanding right now for the pamphlet AA for the Black and African American Alcoholic, the fourth edition of the Spanish Alcoholics Anonymous, and the fifth edition of the English Alcoholics Anonymous. So if you were to click on any of those URLs, you can access the GSO information on those. The next committee consideration from the Literature Committee was to review a progress report on the translation of the Big Book into a plain language translation. So this was, work on this was approved with the 2021 conference, and the 2022 conference was looking at a report on this and asked for a subsequent report to come back in 2023. So what happened with this was that when the Literature Committee was done, a floor action was brought up, and that was held over until the floor actions were discussed on the last day of the conference. And that floor action, and I will read this off, it was recommended that with the translation of the book Alcoholics Anonymous, 4th edition, into plain and simple language, that the 12 steps, the 12 traditions, and the 12 concepts not be translated into plain language in any way, that these remain in the existing form in English as in previous editions of the book Alcoholics Anonymous. So the first thing that happens with floor actions is somebody could make a motion to decline. And if somebody makes a motion to decline and someone seconds that, then a vote is taken. And in order to decline to comment on something or to discuss something, you need substantial unanimity. So for this particular one, I voted no. I did not want to decline this, which means that I did want to discuss this as a potential floor action. And my vote was based on past experience in our area. This is something our area had talked about last year and I believe the year before. And I felt that there was strong sentiment in our area that we were reluctant to have that translation. And while that's already in progress, it seemed like not translating the actual steps, traditions, and concepts, the language of them themselves, would be something that my area would be interested in and would want to at least discuss. So I voted no. There was substantial unanimity to decline to discuss this. So that was a substantial unanimity was the yeses, that yes, they wanted to decline this. So that floor action died. The next committee consideration was regarding a subcommittee report that was reviewed on tools to access the Big Book and requests for study guides. So the committee noted the need for purpose of proposals and what the Big Book were 12 steps and 12 traditions study guides would look like. So this was a little confusing to me because the background for this agenda item indicated that the subcommittee agreed to request feedback from the fellowship on options. And those options were 1, take no action, 2, leverage archival grapevine articles, and 3, create a general service conference approved study guide. So I had interpreted that the requested feedback was the process of pre-conference and leading up to the conference. And it was very clearly indicated by my area that we were not in favor of. So this was an item that we discussed in our pre-conference assembly and was also covered on the delegates questionnaire. And in the pre-conference assembly, we had substantial unanimity both in the room and online to take no action. On the delegates questionnaire, we did not have substantial unanimity on any one of the items, but there was a clear preference for taking no action. So I felt like I really needed to get to the mic and talk this one out a little bit. So committee considerations are really, they're not, you're not really doing discussion, you're more asking questions. But I did find a way of fitting a lot of information that I wanted heard into my 2 minute question, which I finished in a minute and 48 seconds. I had 12 seconds left on the clock. And thank you to one of our past delegates who told me to write out what I wanted to say before I went to the mic. But I thank the committee for their work. And I asked them some questions about, what were the contents of the report, what additional information they asked for, and then whether they discussed those three options or not. And I frankly felt like I didn't really get the answers that I wanted. But here's my concern. That we have been looking at items from, January 2019 through April of 2021 about common solutions, right, to accessing the big book. And this was part of that, right? This was part of like the plain language, simplified language. But when the 2021 conference advisory action came out and it recommended a draft version of the plain and simple language, it didn't indicate anything about going forward with workbooks. And my concern is that we have General Service Office employees and trustees working on a lot of different things right now. And my concern was that we had them working on workbooks, and I don't believe we have any real clear direction from the fellowship that we're all on board with this. And that's my concern. Aside from what my region thinks or what my area thinks and what I think, I would just like to see, before we spend any more time on this, some type of vote about whether we want to move on to this or not. So that was the basis of my minute and 48 second question. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, so this item was part of the updates to our illustrated pamphlets. And so this has been going since a 2016 General Service Conference Advisory Action to do a comprehensive review of this pamphlet, do a modernized presentation of the text and illustrations, and then come back to the conference. So this committee recommended that we do just that and bring back a draft report. So this is the 12 traditions illustrated. And what I have added in the middle of this is the URLs for accessing the current version of this one, as well as Experience Has Taught Us. So in 2021, the conference approved Experience Has Taught Us, which is an additional 12 traditions illustrated pamphlet, but it was felt that it was different enough from 12 traditions illustrated to also approve as a separate pamphlet. So I voted no on this, and the reason was that we approved that last year, and I'm conscious of the shortage of resources that we have. The vote on this one was 101 votes for yes, 31 for no. It did receive substantial unanimity, and this passed, and so progress report will be brought back next year on this pamphlet. There were 4 committee recommendations that became advisory actions on 4 of our existing pamphlets that were under revision. And those 4 pamphlets are: is AA for you? Is there an alcoholic in your life? Frequently asked questions about AA, and this is AA. Those have all been approved, and those pamphlets will be updated for the next printings. The next committee consideration was from a review of 3 changes that were made to the book 12 Steps and 12 Traditions from advisory actions of the 71st General Service Conference.
The Literature Committee took a look at that and took no action, noting that does not appear to be consensus on the changes. And just as a review, those changes were on page 66 and 117. The changes were to remove language like finding a mate of the opposite sex to finding a partner. Second one was discussing the 7 deadly sins and went from language like lustful enough to rape to softer language regarding the 7 deadly sins. And the third change was to add the long form of the traditions at the end of each of the traditions. The committee discussed this and took no action. So the next committee recommendation was one of only 3 committee recommendations that were made at the 72nd General Service Conference and brought to the conference floor that did not ultimately get passed by the conference. So we have an existing book called Experience, Strength, and Hope, which is a book of recovery stories that have been dropped out of subsequent versions or editions of the book Alcoholics Anonymous, so that the stories that were originally in the first, second, and third editions of Alcoholics Anonymous, but were not included in the 4th edition. So we're currently working on a 5th edition of the big book Alcoholics Anonymous, and that was approved at the 71st General Service Conference in 2021. And what that will do is update the stories in the back of the book to better reflect the diversity of our fellowship, as well as expand on the appendices 3 and 5, which are the medical view on AA and the religious view on AA. So this item was to make a 2nd edition of that book when we drop items out of the 4th edition of the book, Alcoholics Anonymous, when we make the 5th edition. And the conference floor discussed this recommendation and felt that it was premature, that at this point we don't have any idea how many books or stories are going to be dropped out of the 5th edition when that is printed. So we did not pass this. There was only 14 votes yes, 114 votes no, and this did not pass because this did not have substantial unanimity. It does not become an advisory action. If you have any questions on the items from the Literature Committee of the 72nd General Service Conference or the 72nd General Service Conference as a whole, please feel free to contact me at p72delegate@area50wny.org. And finally, I wish to thank you for the honor of serving as your delegate to the General Service Conference from Area 50, as well as serving AA as a whole.